Thanks, Evo. I'm Irene, my co-presenter, John. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. We have our intros in here. And make sure I click the right screen. Yeah, we're going to be talking about cosmos in the Catskills. Thanks for having us. So we're going to introduce ourselves. We'll talk a bit about finding constellations. So finding some spring and early summer constellations and some tools that we can use to do that. Talk about observing different patterns in the night sky beyond constellations, like how is our solar system set up? Where are we in our galaxy? And things like that. There's a lot that we can understand about where we are and how we're moving through the universe, our local universe, as it were, just by observing the sky on a regular basis. And then we're going to get more into some nitty-gritty of like really observing like objects. So starting with the moon, great place to start, using maps and other tools. And then John's going to kind of take us through like the progression, like our recommended progression from like starting with binoculars and a variety of different telescopes that people might consider for their first telescope. And of course, observing in Sullivan County, which is where John and I are. John has observed here a lot more than I have, as he'll tell you. I've done more in the city and elsewhere, but yeah, we'll give you some tips if you're a local, or even if you're not and you happen to drop by Sullivan County to come observing with us. So John, do you want to tell us about this and who you are?
Okay, so I'm John Kocijanski. I'm a retired earth science astronomy teacher from Monroe Woodbury High School. So I'm trying to think, it's like 6 years already that I'm retired. So I'm a facilitator of our meetup group. We used to be a club, but through certain personal circumstances and other things, we decided to continue as a meetup group rather than a club, just for being easy. And it also kind of allows us to take on more people who are interested. So this picture is, I also do astronomy outreach. And so this picture was from a telescope workshop that I did for a Weeblo group in Rock Hill. And so they got to play with telescopes, and being that they were so good, they got free NASA stuff. And so that's what they're showing you. So you see all the Weeblos there, and then somebody's little sister too. So she enjoyed herself. And you can see one of the telescopes they got to play with there. So that was back in the fall, I think.
And you're going to tell us more about those types of telescopes later. Yep. I think this telescope that I have with my picture is in one of the later shots. It's a small kind of tabletop-y telescope. We'll talk more about that. But yeah, I'm Irene Pease, friendly neighborhood astronomer, whatever neighborhood. I've been doing astronomy in and around New York City for about 10, 12 years, and then recently relocated to Sullivan County, where it's a lot darker. So I've done a lot of observing under very dark skies out west, and then bright skies in New York City. So we have at least one person from Brooklyn, people from Queens. So hey, New York City, even you can see things in the sky. So just enjoy observing, and I really enjoy sharing this with people. I've been working in education and doing a lot of public outreach with different astronomy events. So I was really excited to work with John presenting this tonight. So starting off, finding some constellations. I know John and I were chatting earlier, and I think for me, one of the earliest things I learned was the Big Dipper, and then like Orion, because it's pretty prominent. And John, you were similar, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Even a long time ago, it's like, yeah, these are some relatively easy things to pick out. And so we like to start showing people these in the sky, because you can also use them to find other things. So starting with Orion, Probably a lot of people are familiar with the belt. It's these three stars, and even if you don't know what it is, like if you see it in the sky, you see like these three stars kind of in a line, and you say, that kind of looks like a thing. And it is a thing. We call it Orion's belt, and it's kind of the central part of the constellation Orion. So it's kind of framed by four mostly bright stars. This one's not as bright. And you also see some star colors in there. So you might notice as we're going through, these stars have different colors. That's a fun thing to look out for. So in one of the shoulders, that's Betelgeuse. And then Bellatrix. So you might recognize some names from Harry Potter. And then for his feet, there's Rigel and Saiph. So kind of a nice box around the belt. And then down below the belt, there's a sword, so to speak, which we'll see this kind of fuzzy spot in the sword. I think we see kind of a better or closer view of that later on as like an example of something to look for in binoculars. So even with the unaided eye, we'll call the naked eye, you can see like there's something there, which is great. So we can use the stars of the belt to kind of point downward or southward to this other really bright star, actually the brightest star in the night sky, called Sirius. And it's also called the dog star because it's in the constellation Canis Major, the big dog. And a lot of times when I show people Sirius, I've heard a lot of people have misconceptions about Polaris or the North Star being a really bright star. I say, no, it's not. Polaris is about as bright as this one here. So I think it's Mirzam. But this one looks about as bright as Polaris does in our sky, and it's right next to the brightest star in the night sky. So just a comparison, don't look for something really bright when you look for Polaris.
It's not even in the right part of the sky.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here you're looking towards, right now, Orion would be in the southeast as the sun is setting. So
yeah, if you know which way south is and you're like, yeah, no, that's the North Star is definitely in the north at all times.
So everything you see in this scene right here, you can see tonight if it was clear.
Yeah, so if you want, you can go out and practice after this. There's a Sirius, and then kind of like there's like a front leg and a dog shaped back leg tail and an imaginary invisible head up here. Takes a lot of imagination with some of these constellations. And then for the little dog, I learned to find that by finding what we call the winter triangle. So really any three stars makes a triangle because that's how triangles work. But if we look at these two bright stars we've already picked out, Betelgeuse and Sirius, it forms a mostly almost perfect equilateral triangle with this other star over here. This is Procyon, which is the bright star in the constellation Canis Minor, the little dog. But it doesn't look anything like a stick dog. Like Canis Minor, if you can imagine, like this little triangle stars makes a head. It almost looks like a dog. Like, yeah, I could see like a little German Shepherd or something. But with Procyon and its little neighboring star here, it's kind of like this little line. So I like to call it the hot dog because it looks more like just a little hot dog than like a whole dog. So that's Canis Minor, the little dog. If we follow the belt up or towards kind of the west, we come to this kind of V-shaped cluster with a bright, slightly yellowy orangish star. So this V-shaped cluster, it's called the Hyades, that makes up the face of Taurus the bull, with Aldebaran being the eye of the bull. It means eye of the bull. And if you look past that, it's not a constellation. This is another open cluster, just a grouping of relatively young stars that a lot of people like to look at. It's a good binocular object called the Pleiades. It's called a lot of other things, but for now we're going to call it the Pleiades. It's really nice to see out there also. So that's a few constellations that we can use and start to get an idea of like, if I can find one thing, I can use that to find other nearby things. This kind of an intro to star hopping that John's going to talk more about in a bit. So if you don't have clear skies tonight to quiz yourself, you can quiz yourself here. See if you can find Orion, Canis Major, and or Taurus in there. And John, do you want to tell us about this photo? You took this photo, right?
Yeah, it's at the Catskill. It's at our our meetup location. And so I think it was from our last meetup that was there that I took this. So you're looking toward the southwest, really. And that's, the skies are pretty dark there, and you get a decent picture.
So you do photography also. So John does photography and astronomy. I just do the astronomy part. But yeah, this is amazing. I mean, there's the clouds. This is a clouds. It's terrestrial. It's not like ET or anything. But hopefully people are able to see. There's the belt. There's the sword. There's Betelgeuse, Bellatrix, Rigel, and Saiph. And then following the belt down, the brightest thing here is Sirius. So part of the dog is kind of into the trees. You can see his back leg, not really the tail.
And then if you go to the left of Sirius there, you can see its head too. There's like a triangle of stars there.
Yeah,
He's
got a head on it.
So you just remember that all of these constellations have stories behind them too. So, Orion's the hunter. He's got some hunting dogs. There's some stories about, his adventures basically in myth.
Yeah. And I don't know if there's a story about him in the bull or not.
I know he's on the
a
opposite
scorpion.
side. He's on the opposite side of the sky as Scorpius, because ruled by a scorpion or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of like why I feel like a lot of these require some imagination. It's like, it's for storytelling, so it's fun. We can see if we follow the belt up, there's a lot of stories about Taurus. I don't want to get into. There's stories about Taurus, the bull. So you can see some of those stars I mentioned from the Hyades cluster. And you can see the color, like this other image from the previous slide. This is from a program called Stellarium. So this is like our fake sky. This isn't the actual sky. But in this picture that John took of the actual sky, like even here you can see some coloring in Betelgeuse in Aldebaran.
And the color has to do with the temperature of the star. The redder or more orange or cooler, and white is hotter. So just like a flame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So more that you can tell just by looking. A few more constellations that you can see later on, well, tonight even, and then through the spring and a little into the summer. This is part of the triangle over here. Betelgeuse is, oh, yep, there's Betelgeuse. So Betelgeuse, Sirius, and Procyon. So the triangle kind of points in this direction towards this kind of backwards question mark. This is another thing where people see it in the sky and they're like, that looks kind of like a thing. It is a thing. So we call this the sickle or backwards question mark, or I see it as like a hanger with like a giant hook and then itty bitty shoulders. That's part of Leo the lion. There's a body back here. And then this little star is his tail. And between, I was going to mention between, actually, I didn't get to, sorry, my Zoom stuff is in the way. The two stars in Orion, I'll show you in another slide, actually kind of point up towards these stars. These are the twins, Castor and Pollux. So between Pollux and the bright star in Leo, that's Regulus, kind of at his heart, there's another constellation that's very faint. So if you don't see anything here, that's why, because it's very faint. There is another star cluster, a group of stars kind of buzzing around together. We call it the beehive or Perseidae bee. So that's kind of in the middle of the constellation Cancer. So Cancer is a faint constellation, but if you can find the stars of Gemini and you can find Leo, just know Cancer is in between them. This is another picture, another fake picture. Again, this is how I find Gemini. If you go from Rigel, kind of perpendicular to the belt of Orion and up through Betelgeuse, it's a long trip, but if you just keep going in that direction, you come to these so-called twin stars. They look very similar in brightness in the night sky. And so those are the heads of the twins of Gemini. So this guy has a head, body, and a little foot. Head, body, foot. A lot of imagination required. But so some constellations I feel like require more imagination. The lion I feel like really does look like a lion. Like you have the question mark, and then I actually made a beautiful picture. This is from my website where I do like current skies. So I was really proud of this lion that I freehand drew in like PowerPoint. So he's like lying down because he's a lion, but that's actually like he's lying down, right? His long body and a nebula, which the name is like means tail. Basically, there's another star in the summer that's just Deneb, that's also the tail, but of a swan, not a lion. So more constellations to practice finding in the spring skies.
Yeah, so knowing the constellation is recognizing patterns. So there are certain patterns of stars that you'll hopefully become familiar with, and that's how you recognize constellations. Because people look at the night sky and are like, how do you know what you're looking at? And so you look for certain patterns. And so, you know, Orion is a very easy pattern, especially with the belt stars to recognize. So once you know certain patterns, then you can navigate through the sky and use the brighter stars to help you.
I think of it like learning my way around a neighborhood. Like you learn your block and then the next block over and the next block over, and you kind of build out. So just starting with two bright constellations like Orion and the Big Dipper, like from Orion, we were able to kind of build out in the same way from the Big Dipper, you can kind of build out. But yeah, recognizing these patterns. So we're not going to do a whole bunch with the Big Dipper because we're doing Orion, but there's a lot that you can find from the Big Dipper. So I'll let people look for the Big Dipper here while they do that. John, do you want to tell us where this picture was taken?
It's the Catskill also.
Catskill must be a great sight to observe, right? So if you haven't found it, it's kind of down towards the horizon. And the Big Dipper is not technically a constellation. It's what we call an asterism. Aster meaning star, ism meaning ism. So it's a starism. It's like a group of stars that we refer to as an object, but not like one of the official constellations like Ursa Major. But it's handy. We can use it to find the Little Dipper, which is much fainter. So with the annotation here, I've shown these two stars kind of from the furthest from the handle and the cup of the Big Dipper. We call those the pointer stars because they point towards Polaris, the North Star. So this is Polaris up here. That's basically the end of the handle of the Little Dipper that curves around. There's a little bowl, but a lot of these stars are really faint. I was barely able to see them in New York City. From the city in a dark park, like I observed from Prospect Park a lot, I could see the North Star and I could see what would be like the pointer stars in the Little Dipper. So the other stars are just really faint, hard to make out from the city or from brighter areas. So the Little Dipper is pretty much all there is to the Little Bear. But as I mentioned, the Big Dipper is just part of this whole constellation Ursa Major. So the Big Bear extends out. He has like a whole body and nose and front legs and back legs. So the Dipper is just kind of the rear and tail of the bear.
Yeah, those are all the brighter stars. The other stars are kind of dim.
You know, and why a tail? Don't ask me. It's from a story. But yeah, that's always going to be out kind of at our latitude. So you can in spring and summer use that to find even more constellations similar to what we were just showing with Orion. So if you want to be able to find a lot of these, without me and John sitting here going, oh, here's how you find things, we have some tools to recommend. One is the evening sky map. They put this out every month. So this is for March. So the April one isn't out yet. But one thing you get is the constellations, and you get a list of fun things that are happening in the sky that you may or may not look for, like events. And I think there's more on the back. So we'll post the website. We'll share the website so we can send that out. Evo can send that out. It's basically skymaps.com.
Yeah, it's a good resource. I mean, it's nice that it shows the patterns of the stars that you can recognize. I mean, you see Orion there. You see, that they did a nice job with, showing the Big Dipper and how do you get to Polaris. I mean, there are other patterns that are easy to see, like Cassiopeia over there is an easy one because it looks like a W or an M. So again, you have some resource that's going to allow you to match the patterns to from what you're looking at to what you're seeing in the sky.
Yeah, and because they update it for you every month, like it's pretty straightforward to say, oh, what's here, and how to use it a little bit. There's a little bit. So you have to orient it right. So you have to stand and face south, and then this is on your horizon. Or if you stand and face west, then this is on your horizon. It's similar to another really great tool that we both highly recommend, Guide to the Stars. So these are planispheres. So these are fantastic. They work year round. So there's John's, here's mine. So if you have one, it's good year in, year out, but it won't show some things like the planets and the moon, because as we'll see in a minute, or as you probably already know, like they don't stay in the same positions. So on this map, we see, oh, Mars is over by Taurus, great. But on this map, well, Orion's not out, but it's not going to show you Mars because Mars is going to move. But what you can do is you align the date along the outside with the time along the inside. And then it's set for that date and time. So if you want to go out tonight, you set it for whatever time tonight, and then you're good to go. If you don't want to pay whatever for a nice sturdy plastic one, you can even print them online. You can literally go to a website, which will send the website, or you can just Google Uncle Al Star Wheel, and you print out, this is just so amazing. How do I stop share? All right. So you print it out and you get 2 pieces of paper, right? So you get like the map and you get the wheel and you cut them out, and you don't even have to use tape. Tape is great. But even without tape, like you have your wheel, and so you change the wheel until the date matches the time, right? I really like these just because I think they give a better, they give a nice view of like how the sky really moves and kind of where we are and why we see different things different times a year. So highly recommend these. I started with this and a pair of binoculars for the longest time. That's what I had, and it got me pretty far.
Yeah, so if you're wondering what, where the constellations are in the sky, and it shows the bright stars also. That's what you can get. I mean, these days people rely upon their smartphone too much for everything, and including, trying to find stuff in the sky. It just doesn't give the same level of you really just don't get a real good understanding of what's up with the sky, because the planisphere really mimics the sky's motion that's created by the Earth's rotation and also the Earth's revolution around the sun. So as the night continues, the stars rise in the east and set in the west, and so the planisphere mimics that. And then if you set the planisphere to different dates and times throughout the year, it really is showing how we're on the Earth looking at different views of our universe. And so there's different star fields that we see.
Yeah, so like even this star field, like we can see at 11 p.m. in mid-July, we would see this star field. We would also see it at 6 p.m. in late September if it was dark enough, right? So like people say, oh, when is this going to be out? Like, well, you can see the majority of the sky on any night of the year if you just stay up all night long. But usually we're like, well, what's out, before midnight, before I need to be in bed, kind of thing.
Yeah, like if you went outside this morning at like 4 o'clock, you would see the summer triangle and not the winter triangle.
Mhm.
And then in summertime, people ask me like, where's Orion? I'm like, Orion's not out yet.
Yeah, you have to wait a
So
while.
unless you wanted to get up early in the morning, then you would see Orion.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to take us through this little video. I have a couple of videos. This one is showing the whole year and just kind of showing every single night at 10 o'clock. So if we just went outside and looked at the same time every night for the next year, this is what we would see. So we see the fixed stars shifting, and then there's some other things. That bright thing is the moon. We saw some other things that were kind of not moving with these fixed stars, as we call them. We also see this fuzzy bit, the Milky Way. Looks a bit brighter in the summer and fall sky than it does in the winter time. So there's a reason for that. But yeah, this is the general motion. Some things to note, that we have these things, the things that wander, the moon and some other things. We'll call them, I don't know, wanderers. In Greek, that's like planeo, so we'll call them planets because they wander against the backdrop of stars. Here we have the same thing, but with labels, so a little less mysterious. And you can see the constellations outlined. So if you're not sure what something is, that's because you need imagination to figure it out. But you see the planets kind of wandering along this line. We call this the ecliptic. That's basically the plane of the solar system as seen from Earth. So the planets are pretty much all going around the sun in a flat plane. Since we're in that plane, it looks like a line across our sky. So you notice the moon, the planets are all close to that line. We're never going to see the moon up in the Big Dipper or down in Orion, or you'll never see a planet down by the Big Dog or up by Cassiopeia, because those are not along the ecliptic. So planets, moon, sun, always along the ecliptic. And again, you can see just the difference in the Milky Way, how it looks brighter sometimes of year and fainter other times. Well, that kind of tells us that we're not in the center. And also just the fact that, just go back where you can kind of see it here, the Milky Way is not along the ecliptic. So that tells us that our solar system, the plane of our solar system, isn't the same as the plane of the galaxy. So more on that in just a minute. But so I'm going to circle back, but this kind of shows Milky Way in the background. When we say that's the Milky Way, actually all the stars we see in the sky are in the Milky Way. Everything we see in the sky is in the Milky Way except for other galaxies. So this is the thicker part. This is the plane of the Milky Way, but we're still inside of it. So here we're kind of zooming out. Those lines are like the orbits of other planets, so we can see how they kind of line up in a plane for our solar system. And we turn on the constellation lines. You notice that even far away beyond the orbit of Neptune, the constellation lines haven't changed. They're still the same shape because the stars are so much further away from us than the planets are. It was kind of mind-boggling when people realized just how far away they were. But these lines now, right, they're connecting the brightest stars in our sky. So if we move really far, oops, I need to go back. If we move really far away from Earth, we can see where those stars are in our galaxy. So this is a little bit of perspective of saying, yeah, everything we see is in the Milky Way galaxy. So sorry, the video gets a little bit jumpy at some parts. We start to see kind of the 3D of like what we see in the sky is like 2D is actually 3D. And some of those are actually a lot further away. But all the stars that we're seeing in the night sky are kind of in this one little corner of the galaxy, not even the corner. It's like about halfway out, right? But that's our night sky. So all the stars are in the galaxy. It's just that we're seeing some of them kind of like in this band. So this last video, last one I promise, is showing the orientation of our solar system. So these concentric rings as we get further and further away, that's the orientation of the solar system, which we're going to see relative to the galaxy. This is just a smaller clip of a longer video, hence the subtitles there. But if we extend this view all the way out to kind of the view we saw before in our galaxy, you can see, oh yeah, they don't line up. The plane of the solar system is like this, and the plane of the galaxy is like that. So I always thought that was kind of a neat thing. And then also seeing, again, since we're a ways out from the center, when we have northern summer, the Earth is over kind of on this side of the sun. And so we see this in the night sky. We have the brighter portion of the Milky Way because we're looking in towards the center, towards the thicker section. And when the Earth is on this side, we're having, the northern winter. And so during that nighttime, we're looking towards kind of the outer part of the arm that we're on. And so that's why the winter Milky Way is a bit fainter than the summer Milky Way. So something we can kind of tell just from like looking at the sky and observing like how the Milky Way looks different different times of year. So there's a lot that we can tell just with our eyes. Sorry, I'm trying to get to the next slide. But if you want to start looking at specific objects and using other tools, this would be the place to start. So I know, John, I'm going to stop sharing, and I think John's going to take over because he's going to be doing more of the pointing at this point. While he's doing that, my moon map, got my moon map ready.
Hold on.
I'm sure this is my map of the moon. It folds up and winds up its fabric, so I can make a scarf out of it. Isn't that handy? All kinds of great tools out there, and we'll even tell you where to buy them.
Hold on.
I think at the end we have
There we go.
some upcoming events. Do you want to go back to the moon one? Yeah.
Well, just to follow up on what Irene was talking about, I mean, as the Earth is orbiting around the sun, it's like taking us on a tour of our universe. Like it's almost like you're on a tour bus going, traveling through the city or something like that. And you're looking at different, portions of, the night sky. So, I don't know. Do we want to take any questions or anything here? I saw somebody had their hand raised.
One thing, John, one person did want to ask how if you had any sense of scale of how far apart the Gemini stars are.
As far as what you're looking at in the sky or in actuality?
Right. The kind of scale of the how far apart those are in reality.
You mean as you see them in the sky or in reality? because I'm not sure the actual distances of Castor and Pollux away from the Earth.
Right.
Or they're not right next to each other. So that's another misconception I think people have, is that the stars that form the patterns that you see, they're not all equidistant from the Earth. I mean, they vary widely in their distance, and those distances are vast. I mean, a light year is 6 trillion miles. And so Sirius, I think, is like 8 light years away from the Earth. Does that sound about right? I think it's one of the closest.
Yeah, 8.6
Yeah, so
for Gemini. They're 34 and 52 light years, so they're not next to each other in space. There's a
yeah.
33
So
and
it just happens to be our view of where they are in the sky. So is that what they're asking about, I think?
I think how apart they actually are, but
I mean, there's another way to
But
judge distances in the sky by using your hand. You know, there's a certain number of degrees. What is it, like 5 degrees or something is your hand? And then your thumb is like 1 degree or something like that.
Yeah, so like a full moon is half a degree. Like when you look at, it's hard because like we think the moon looks so big, but it's half a degree. They're 4.5 degrees separate. So like, what is that? 9 full moons would fit between them in the sky. Does that answer?
I think that gives some sense of scale.
But the moon is
And in
smaller than
the
you think it is.
Yeah, so there's a way of judging how far things are angular distance from each other as you view them in the sky. And then there's reality. You know, how far away are some of these objects? So it just so happens they are lined up with each other to form these patterns that we view. So like if you
Right.
went back in time to I guess the ancient, like Egyptian civilization, right? That their North Star wasn't Polaris. It was a different star. I think it's a star called Thuban. It's in Draco. So, you know, the sky changes over thousands of years to a certain degree. And often in the future, the patterns of the stars that we will see won't be exactly like what we're seeing this, today, because the stars are moving in space. And so those patterns will change over, long periods of time.
Wow. And just in the interest of time, so if everyone has questions, feel free to drop those in the Q&A. And if we can get to them tonight, then we will towards the end. And then if not, we can send you an email to answer your question. So feel free to drop those in the Q&A box.
Okay, so the moon. So the moon is really the first object that you notice in the sky when it's out. And it's really the closest of everything that we're looking at, I guess, other than meteors, really. And I guess if you have a stray asteroid, it goes between the moon and the Earth, like the one that was there one earlier this week that buzzed by? They said it was about they call it a city killer or something like that.
Yeah.
So, but the moon, is easy to pick out details even with your eyes, because your eyes are your main number one instrument for looking at the sky. So we just went through a whole discussion about what it is that you're seeing with your eyes, really. And so the moon, it really is an object that shows details. And so those details, the craters, mountains, the lava basins, the maria, the seas, you see those with your eyes. And then if you have binoculars, you see even more. So the thing is, a lot of people don't realize that when you're looking at the moon when it's not full, that's when you're going to get a better view, especially when you're looking along the terminator right there. It's the boundary between light and dark. There's a lot of shadows that are cast. There's a lot of contrast. What's really cool sometimes, and you can kind of see it in this picture up here, like right around in here, you'll have something that is on the darker side, just past the terminator, that is up really high. And you'll see it catching some of the sunlight into it. It's like you see like this like little white dot in the darkness just over the terminator. So that could be some point of higher elevation. So there's a lot of details that can be seen. So, and then, this phase of the moon that you're looking at here is its first gibbous. So looking at the moon when it's not in full phase gives you a little bit more of a pleasurable view, I guess, because during a full phase, everything gets washed out. And then on the right-hand side, one of the things that you should realize about the moon is that everything has names. And so, like everybody's heard about the Sea of Tranquility, Apollo 11, so that's right over here. The seas are called Mari. They're really just lava-filled basins. And if you look at their shapes, a lot of them are circular, so they're probably humongous impact basins that formed when the moon was, pulling itself together and forming. So here's an example of a crater on the moon that has a name of a person that you probably have heard of before, Plato. So that's, there are all those locations on the moon have names. And so, here's a moon map that I just pulled out that I use for instructional purposes. So this, has names for everything on it. So sometimes, like when I'm presenting this, I'll pass the moon map around and I'll say, try to find a place on the moon that the name, you've heard the name of before. Like the last time I did that, there's a crater on the moon called Pythagoras. Like everybody knows, supposedly we learned Pythagorean theorem, right? So all the places have names, and then there are stories behind the names too. So like, for example, we were talking earlier about one of the prominent craters down here in the southern hemisphere is named Tycho. It's named after an astronomer that lived in the late 1400s, I believe, 1500s. He did a lot of observations of the solar system, and the information that he gathered was taken by his assistant Kepler. There's the Kepler crater right there, and Kepler figured out how the solar system works, the mechanics of it. And Tycho Brahe, he has kind of a storied past, like we were talking before about a story that he lost like the tip of his nose during a duel or something like that. And then we also mentioned a story that we're not sure if it's actually true, how he died of a burst bladder at a party or something like that. So there's all kinds of like stories about it. So there's all kinds of stories about some of these places on the moon. So anyway, the moon is an interesting place to consider looking at first, because it's got a lot of detail and it's got a lot of names to all these places.
There's a Pease crater, but it's on the far side. Just saying.
I don't think there's a Kocijanski crater.
No Kocijanski crater.
No,
not yet.
Not yet. And then you have the planets. The planets are bright in the sky. I mean, the visible planets are really the ones that you're going to see most of the time are Venus and Mars and Jupiter and Saturn. And if you're lucky, you'll be able to see Mercury, but Mercury is very close to the horizon. So in this picture over here, this is the recent Venus and Jupiter conjunction. That evening, when this is a picture that I took over the old Concord golf course that's next to the casino in Monticello. So, it's a nice sunset sky. You can still see the two planets here. Venus is the brighter one. And this picture on this side, and you can kind of make out, part of the ecliptic here, because you have Jupiter right there, and here's the moon, and here is Saturn over here, over next to the tree. So it kind of forms part of that line, that ecliptic. And that was taken, I'm not sure, a couple of years ago at the Catskills, close to sunset. Yeah. So looking at the planets in the sky and knowing what's out. So one of the things that you have to do is try to find out when the planets are out, because they're not out all the time. Like, for example, if you wanted to look at Saturn right now, it's not out anymore. It's already set below the horizon. So the planets aren't out all the time.
Yeah, I think someone was asking about the lineup, but we've lost Saturn. So if we went out tonight, we'd still see, Mercury's probably set by now, but Venus, Mars, and Jupiter.
Yes.
And then Uranus, but I'll talk about that later.
Yeah, it's pretty faint. You can see that in binoculars, but not really with your eyes. So the next step after that is binoculars. Now, you don't have to have a large pair of binoculars like these, but any pair of binoculars is going to show you much, much more than your eyes are going to. So those larger ones that this person has are kind of heavy to hold by hand, so you're using a tripod. So if you know anything about binoculars, you have a binoculars that could be like 7 by 35 or 10 by 50. Anytime you get a little bit larger than 50 millimeters for the main lens, it's kind of heavy to hold by hand. So you have to have something to support it when you're looking at the sky. But any binoculars are do. I mean, you'll be able to see the Orion Nebula through binoculars. You can see the Pleiades. You can see the Beehive Cluster, the Andromeda Galaxy, a lot of different objects. So binoculars would be a nice next step. Because one of the things that happens when people say, oh, I'd like to get into astronomy, they all of a sudden just like dive right into a telescope, and they don't really know what they're looking at. So before you look at telescopes, this book really was useful for me when I was learning the sky. So I started learning about the sky, using a planisphere. It was really part of the curriculum that I taught in high school. It's kind of interesting. When I was in college, I was a geology major, and with education, and I only had like 3 mini courses in astronomy, and that was it. Everything else I had to learn on my own. So as far as teaching that curriculum. So this book is called Turn Left at Orion, and I recommend it to everyone. There are a lot of books about how to find things in the sky, but this one really works well in that it shows how to star hop to find different objects. In other words, you find certain constellations, certain stars, go from one star to another maybe, and then you locate this object. So this page right here I opened up to is how to find this globular star cluster M3. And so it's actually in between a star called Arcturus, which is I think it's the 3rd brightest star in the northern hemisphere sky. It's in a constellation called Boötes. And then there's another star here, which is pretty close to the Big Dipper, called Cor Caroli. It's about halfway between the two. So once you locate those 2 stars, it kind of goes through a discussion about what you're looking at, and it gives a drawing of this. That's M3. So it's a globular star cluster. So I think you might be able to see that in binoculars. It's pretty bright.
Yeah,
So
very different from the other star cluster, from like the Pleiades or other things. There's different types of clusters. That's another talk. But yeah, star clusters, really great in binoculars.
So anyway, that's how you find stuff. So like when I'm out at a star watch and people are like, well, how do you know where all this stuff is? Mainly because of that book. Once I learned the sky and the constellations and the brighter stars, how to star hop, that book really told me where everything is. And I essentially, memorized most of that book. And it was just through, a lot of experience that I know where this stuff is off the top of my head. So let's say you're ready for a telescope after you go through all of this, learning curve. This is a picture from a workshop on telescopes that I did at the Grahamsville Library. And this is a scoutmaster and some scouts that were there to do some work for some sort of merit badge they were doing or something like that. I'm not sure. There were Girl Scouts there too. But anyway, I brought a bunch of small telescopes. And so if you look over here, there are advantages to having a small telescope in that it's small and easy to set up. So let's say, one evening you're like looking at the sky and you're like, oh, the moon looks really great tonight. And let's say that you had a telescope, you want to look at it a little bit more detail, something easy to set up, light, put it, take it out, set, maybe even you have it set up already, just take it out, and start looking. That's going to be a little bit more fulfilling, I think, than having some larger thing, a larger telescope that you have to take time to set up and then break down. And then you could be in a situation where like, I got to set up that thing again to look at the sky. I'm not really into this. So smaller telescopes might be the way to go. And plus they cost a lot less money. And they show quite a bit. mean, all of those objects that are in that Turn Left to Orion book can be seen with a small telescope. Maybe some telescope with an aperture really the size of the lens, or the mirror in a telescope of maybe like 4 inches, 4.5 inches. All those objects can be seen. And so that gives, there's a concept called grab and go, and it has to do with small telescopes. You take the telescope, grab it, go outside, start looking. And it's a very fulfilling experience. So this way you don't have to mess around with trying to set up the telescope or tear it down. In fact, this telescope right here was, for years, that was my grab and go telescope. And if you take a look at why it's grab and go, it literally has a handle on it. I mean, the whole telescope, minus the little table I put it on, was only 17 pounds. And so all I had to do is just leave it set up. And if I wanted to go out on a work night or something like that, when I was working, there it was. So I can just grab it and go outside. And all these other telescopes are similar as far as that ability. So this is a picture of one of our star watches up at Claryville. And so that's the reason I chose this, because it shows a difference in size between telescopes. So a grab and go telescope over here, it's a 80 millimeter refractor. So 80 millimeters, a little over 3 inches. So small, easy to set up, but you can only see so much. So once you start realizing that, then you're like, oh, I want to see more. And when you want to see more, you're going into telescopes that are harder to set up, they're heavier, and they cost a lot more money. So that evening, we were using an 11-inch telescope to view the sky. And somebody actually gave me this telescope. The person that gave me the telescope is this guy right here that's waving his hand. And so the backstory behind that is that he had this telescope. He bought it back in the early 1980s. I found a sales slip in the trunk. They had like a case for the telescope that dated to 1981. So that's when he bought this telescope. And he said that he used it for a while and he just set it in his garage, and it had been sitting in the garage for years and years and years. And so he contacted the local library in Grahamsville there and asked if there was anybody that would want this telescope, because he wasn't using it. And so I took it, and he didn't use it because it was big and heavy and hard to put together. And so I got it into a situation where it was a little bit more usable. And he was there that night to look through his telescope. He hadn't looked through in years. And so he was quite happy about that. He's got a nice big smile on his face. He really enjoyed it. So anyway, that's something that you have to be wary of. I mean, you really could go, off the deep end as far as equipment and astronomy, telescopes. But getting something, the best telescope really is the one that you're going to use. So if it's just too much to handle, you're just not going to use it. So that's what happened to him. It was just too much for him to handle. So if you want to buy a telescope, one of the things that people who are into telescopes recommend is buying a Dobsonian telescope, which is a reflecting telescope. It's got a mirror. It's essentially point and look, and it's very easy to set up, and you get a lot of bang for your buck because you get a larger aperture, a larger mirror for your money. And it shows a lot. It can keep you occupied for a long, long time. So the picture on the left over here is in New York City somewhere. This is that's Irene's pride and joy there, that telescope, 10-inch reflector. Yeah. So it shows quite a bit. I mean, it's excellent views through it. And then there's a smaller telescope off to the side here. And this scene right here on the right, that's at Orange County Community College. And it was an astronomy class. They were having a public observation night, and mainly the moon and the planets. And the professor, the astronomy professor there, he's there in the orange. He has several 8-inch Dobsonian telescopes that he uses with his students. So his choice of telescope for his students was a Dobsonian reflector, because it was easy to use and you can see quite a bit with an 8-inch reflector. So there's people using it. There are pros and cons for all the types of telescopes that you can purchase. And so, you can see like this person is kind of bending over here. And so that one of the things about these Dobsonian reflectors, the ones that are commercially made, they're a little bit lower to the ground, so you have to bend over or sit in a chair. So, there's all pros and cons about different telescopes. But the likelihood of using something like this rather than something more complicated is probably higher. So you're more likely to get out and use it and get more enjoyment from that.
When I go to set mine up, like, and I'm with other people observing, it takes like 3 minutes to set up. Whereas like some of the others with tripods and all this other stuff, it takes them like 5-10 minutes to set up, at least. I'm like, done observing.
Right.
That's very fast.
So where do you go? Well, light pollution matters a lot. I'm sure people are very aware of this, that the light pollution is getting, kind of out of hand. But there are still places that are fairly dark where you can get some decent observing it. So down here, New York City, Orange County, Sullivan County, Monticello, this is where I am. I live right on the edge of this like orange area here into the yellow. I'm still amazed what I can see. I mean, we were going over a preview of what we were going to present tonight. And one of the things I dug out were my notes, my observing notes. And the other night I was out with an 8-inch telescope that I had on my deck, and I observed like 20 different objects, through the light pollution of Monticello, including galaxies in Leo. So, just because there's light pollution doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to see anything. But as you can see right here, you go all the way up into the Catskills, right around the Perpactin Reservoir there, very dark up there. Our location that we go and use most of the time near Claryville is like right around in here. And then if you notice over here, it's kind of interesting that down here in here's northwestern Sullivan County, so here's Fremont Center, going down through here along the Delaware River and toward Eldred, Ulen, and Narrowsburg in this area. It's pretty dark out there too. So
Yeah, I've known
light
people
pollution
even in
matters.
the city who can see galaxies and stuff, like who made a point to like see galaxies from Central Park. It's very hard, but it can be done. It's just really hard. Having a darker sky is much, much better.
So there's a way to classify how dark your sky is. It's called the Bortle scale. So most of us probably live in this area here, suburban, rural skies right here. But it's interesting about this. They give numbers on it as far as how bright the sky is. And then, in fact, one of the things I just wanted to point out is that if you go to the darker areas, there's no place in New York State that's a 1. And only in the Adirondacks is there a 2, deep in the Adirondacks. But if you go out to the west, like Nevada, Arizona, wherever, right? You lived in Arizona for a while.
Yeah.
The skies out there are just so incredibly dark. There's got to be places out there, a lot of places that are 1s. So we live on the East Coast, so you're not going to get the darkest of dark skies, in other words. And then what's interesting here is that they give a way of judging, what the darkness of the sky is by what you're seeing. So they're looking here at the Andromeda Galaxy, M31, whether or not you can see it. And so that's usually pretty easy to see, even in a kind of a suburban or rural sky. It looks like kind of a little fuzzy patch. And if you got that book, Turn Left at Orion, and tell you where to find it, it's very easy to find in the sky. So the reason why I wanted to show that is because, they actually have a way of grading how dark your sky is. So with this, once you figure out that you want to go to a dark location, well, what's the sky like there? So there are a couple of resources here. Clear Sky Chart, which is a website. And this is a image from the Clear Sky chart for Walnut Mountain. That's in Liberty. That's where we used to observe as a club. But one of the things they did there that messed us up was that they put in a floodlight next to the ball field that we observed on, and it was on a motion sensor, and it was on all the time. So you're like about 20 feet away from the light, and you move like a little bit, and then it turns on for like 10 minutes or something. So we're like, that's it, we're done. So anyway, it goes through the cloud coverage, and then the transparency, which is how clear the sky is as far as particulates primarily and high clouds, because it can be totally clear, but if there's a lot of dust in the atmosphere or smoke, that's going to cut down on the transparency. You're not going to be able to see very faint objects. There was one instance, trying to think, it was last year or year before, we were at Walnut Mountain, and that's when we had a lot of forest fires in the west. And we used the clear sky clock chart, and it showed it was going to be clear that night. But we get out to Walnut Mountain, and it's all kind of murky in the sky. And it was the smoke from the forest fires. And one of the objects that we looked at that night was Jupiter. And Jupiter was as red as Mars because of the smoke in the sky. Jupiter is usually very bright. You can see the equatorial bands in it. And this was like red, just like, Mars would be. So that was because of the smoke. So they actually have, as part of this website, like a smoke forecast too. And then there's seeing, which is how turbulent the sky is. And so if you want to look at details on the moon or the planets, a steadier sky is going to show more details, almost like looking through moving water. When the air is turbulent, you're not going to see as much details. The deep sky objects like galaxies and star clusters and nebula, it doesn't really affect it much. The seeing really is more important if you're looking at the planets or the moon, or if you want to use higher magnifications, then that's not, you're just magnifying moving air more. And then darkness here has to do with, the moonlight primarily. And then you have some apps here, Clear Outside and Astro-Spheric. And then the tried and true weather forecasts and satellite imagery. So you can use all these resources and still come up with a prediction of clear skies, and it doesn't happen. So you have to really, I guess, kind of be patient and take the opportunities when they come about. Because if you wait for like a clear sky, like a perfectly clear sky to emerge, it may happen very, very rarely. I mean, you have to get out, as often as you can, and really to, fulfill your desire to, enjoy the sky. So, the satellite imagery really is the last resort on all that. So those are resources to know what the sky is like if you're going to go out.
Yeah, usually you want multiple agreeing. Very rarely do they all completely agree, but if at least 3 of 4 are agreeing and saying go, then might as well go. Unless you look outside and say, yeah, no, there's clouds. I can see clouds.
Well, one of the things is that we've, when we were a club, really as a meetup group too, we could go months without observing because the skies just would not cooperate. So one of the things that we decided to do as a group is that we would have like a flash star watch. So like during the week, if it looks like within 48 hours it's going to be clear, send out an email to everybody, let's go. So, that if you have more opportunities, you're going to have a more fulfilling experience. But if you wait till a Friday or Saturday night and it never turns out to be clear, then, you're kind of out of luck.
Or you just move to Arizona. Just move to Arizona. It's easier.
That's true. My brother lives in Reno, Nevada. When we go out, and when I go out to visit him, we go out, away from the city. It's incredibly dark. So this is our prime location. It's along Hunter Road in near Claryville. So on the map right here, here's Grahamsville down here, and here's the fairgrounds, and then here's Curry, the Dollar General store there. So this is 55 right here. And then you go up towards Claryville on what they call the Claryville Road. And there is a road that cuts across from Claryville over to Will Weemock. And right there along that road is this humongous field. It's wide open. And that's the place that we park alongside the road and observe from there. And really, there's not very much traffic up there. I mean, the last time we were up there, excuse me, for about a little over an hour, and there wasn't one car that went by. And the night that Irene was there was what, 3 cars maybe or something like that?
Yeah, it was like 2 or 3 cars max.
Yeah, so it's minimal traffic, and the location is just amazing. So that's one of the places that you could go, and a lot of people know about that place too. Especially in the summertime, we see people up there, looking at the sky because they know about it, and it's easy to get to. So this right here shows the statistics on how dark it is there. So it's a Bordeaux class 3, and it gives you some other statistics about how dark it is. But in reality, the way to know what it's like there is to actually go. So there it is. Imagine that picture right there, 360 degrees all the way around. So that's what it's like there. It's on top of a hill, fly along this dark back road, really. You're looking here to the south, really southeast. This is in the summertime. I think it was July when I took the pictures. Here, fireflies. Here's the horizon with the sky glow. Probably, looking toward maybe like Monticello, Liberty, Kingston, Newburgh out that way possibly too. Here's the stars in the sky. Here's a satellite, lots of satellites moving across the sky. And then here's the Milky Way right here. This is the central bulge of the Milky Way. Here's Scorpius right here. It's a bright star called Antares. Sagittarius is over here. Our galactic center is like somewhere like around in here. That's where our, galactic black hole is. You can see the clouds in the Milky Way with this dark line that cuts through here. So that's how dark it is there. I mean, you can see the Milky Way with your eyes there.
Yeah. And that's like the brightest part of the sky glow, right? Because to the
Right.
north, you're looking deeper into the Catskills. So there's no glow in the north. It's
Right. And in the
it's
north, the
incredible.
only glow that we see there really is, I think it must be from Frost Valley, the YMCA camp up there. Because really, you're looking right directly into the, toward the heart of the Catskills. So this is a prime location. And it's obviously along a public road, so you can go there anytime you want, really, to observe. The woman who introduced me to this place lived in Claryville, and she said, yeah, I used to go up here all the time. People would tell me about this place all the time, and I finally, I went with a woman that used to live in Claryville that told me about it, and I said, yeah, let's go up there and see what it's like. So that's the spot. So here's our Bashkill location, and we do our star watches in association with the Bashkill Area Association. So this is Route 209 right here, headed toward Port Jervis. Wurtzboro would be right over in here somewhere, out farther. Here's Haven Road. It cuts across the Bashkill. Beautiful wetlands area if you're into outdoors, hiking trails, biking, lots of nature there, birding, kayaking. So a lot of things to do there. Then you go down South Road here. This is where the Mamakating Environmental Education Center is. So we'll talk about that in a little bit because tomorrow night I'll be doing a presentation there. That's a good place to visit. South Road, here's the winery, and right across from it is the boat launch. So that's open at night too. So one of the things that happened when we left Walnut Mountain, disbanded as a club, is that we used to have to pay liability insurance to use the town property on the, at the town park there. And so that's really the big thing about some places is that to officially be there, you have to have some kind of liability insurance. They don't want people wandering around at night and possibly hurting themselves and, I guess, suing them or something. So to try to find a spot that to be, I guess, official, you have to look for some place that's open at night to the public. And so, the Bashkill boat launch is. People kayak at night there. So anyway, here's the clear sky. Here's the light pollution information there. It's class 4, but it is pretty dark there. So there it is.
And we've already seen a few pictures that you took from Bashkill. Some of the other pictures we saw earlier in the presentation from Bashkill.
Yeah, so it's definitely a usable site. Dark there, not as dark as Claryville, but it's accessible at night, and gives fairly dark skies. So if you look over here, here is the Little Dipper, Ursa Minor, and there's Polaris right there. So that was from our last star watch at the Bashkill. So the Bashkill is our number 2 location. Then I discovered another location was out in Forestburg. So here's 42 that goes to Port Jervis. Monticello will be up in here. Here's the Forestburg Playhouse, if you're familiar with that. Beautiful place to go. excellent presentations there, plays all summer long. They have a nice cafe there too with a lot of good food. So you go down through here on this road, you're really headed toward Glen Spey. Here's the Mongup Reservoir. There's an eagle blind that's right here. And then you go down towards Glen Spey, and right here is the gas pipeline, but there's a parking area there with a DC kiosk that's there. So I don't know if it's a trailhead or if it's just some kind of informational kiosk, but there's a parking lot there that's open all the time. And so that's another location we tried out last summer, and it works out pretty well. So here's a picture of the Milky Way that I took at that location. So it's pretty dark there. So it's another possible location. I'd like to try that location again this summer. Then another location we tried out was closer to Monticello. It's near Rock Hill. This is Wolf Lake right here. Rock Hill would be up here off of the page. There's a road that goes down through here to called Katrina Falls Road. And at the end of the road, at dead ends, is actually a trailhead there for Neversink Gorge. Goes down to the Neversink River. There's a waterfall down in there. And then you go over here towards Wolf Lake, and there's another parking area right in here. And there's a kiosk. And technically, this is all part of a trail. But you can drive in here with your vehicle. I think they open the gate in April and they close it up in December. And so you can stay there overnight too, because they allow camping, overnight camping. And so right here along where the power lines are is where we tried a star watch. And so on this side, you can see us there. So there's the power lines, pretty dark sky. But it's closer to civilization, I guess, close to Monticello. It's close to Route 17, so fairly convenient. So, from April through to December, it's open. You can walk right in there. So if you're interested in our meetup group, you can send me an email and I'll put you on our contact list, or you could check out our Facebook page. So we make posts there about our meetups. And really, if you're on the list, the contact list, that's how you'll find out about, if we're going to have one and, when we're going to meet and where we're going to meet. And here's our schedule that you'll get if you get on the email list. And you can see our next Star Watch is going to be at the Bashikill. And that's a picture of us last time we were at the Bashikill. So notice everybody's happy to be out, watching, observing looking at the stars.
In the freezing cold.
In the freezing cold.
Yeah.
Well,
Always dress warmer than you
cold.
think you need to. Always just warmer
Right.
than you think you need to.
Right.
Even in summer.
Because there's no sense in being uncomfortable. Because that's really what happens a lot of times, is that people come out on a meetup and you're like, oh, I'm cold. And it's like they've only been there for like half an hour or something. So, obviously not in the summertime, but in the winter or the spring or the fall, it can get pretty cold. And
even in summer when it's 50 degrees feels cold after 4 hours. Trust me.
True.
Feels cold.
And we do have one person asking, is winter better than summer for observing the night sky?
Yes.
She prefers the winter. I like the winter a lot too, but the night sky, there's a lot of things to see in every season, really.
Yeah.
It's just that in the wintertime, it's just so cold sometimes that it really hinders your enjoyment, so you got to dress for it.
Yeah, the winter sky is better and the nights are longer. So you'd think, yay, but cold. Pros and cons. Those are the pros and cons. Winter sky, I think, is better, but it's just so cold. But yeah, there's good stuff all the time. There's always something good in the sky, unless it's cloudy.
Okay. And so, usually during a meetup, I'll bring a telescope, and maybe some other people too. Irene brought her a telescope once. And you're welcome to, bring binoculars, your telescope. Usually what happens is a lot of people look through my telescope, and I tried for a while saying, oh, I got a telescope you want to borrow? And we tried it a couple times, and people ended up looking through my telescope anyway. So I ended up giving that telescope to the earth science teacher at Tri-Valley High School. So then there's another astronomy club in the area, and that's Rock Astronomy. They have one of their dark sky sites is near Livingston Manor at a place called Haven for Humanity. So they rent the property, and you can see that they prepared the property too. It's all mowed, nice picnic table there, some benches. That little shed right there, they do have porta potties, but that shed right there is a solar powered hookup for electricity, because a lot of people who go to this location, they're into imaging. So they're into taking pictures in the night sky. So they have all their equipment set up, and then they have a power source that they could use. In fact, last time I was there were 6 of us there, and 4 people were imaging, and only 2 of us were looking through the telescopes just to enjoy the sky. So that's a whole other can of worms as far as astronomy, because you can get so wrapped up in trying to take a picture that you'd really miss the sky. So it's a lot easier than it used to be, but still, all those guys were doing was staring at their laptop screens. So here's the dark sky schedule. They do public events at the Anthony Wayne Park at Bear Mountain, I believe. And it's only $20 to join the club for the year, because this location is members only. But for $20, and you can go up there anytime you want to. All you have to do is email the people who are in charge of the site, the club members, say you're going up, and you just go. And so some of these people, they like there's one guy I met there, he traveled all the way from the North Fork of Long Island just to do imaging there. So it was like 4 or 5 hours, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, it's in Harriman Park. A lot of state parks are pretty good, and yeah, they might have permits. Some places have stargazing permits and stuff, but state parks are a good bet to check out.
Yeah, usually, if you go to some place that's a park and it's dark sky, a lot of times you're not going to be bothered at all. Like we used to observe at Walnut Mountain, and you can get up there at night, and I don't think anybody would bother you. They used to have it gated off, but they don't anymore. So, and there are other places too. I don't think if you're there, and I don't think anybody would bother you. So anyway, here are some upcoming events that we recommend. So on the 30th, if the sky cooperates, a nice binocular target, Venus and Uranus conjunction, they're like close together in the sky. And then Venus and the Pleiades, all known as M45. That's a listing of deep sky objects. They all go by M and then some number. And then Mercury, in the sky so that you could actually see it. And then the total eclipse from Indonesia, if you're planning a trip. Although there's going to be an eclipse coming up next year. That's going to be, hopefully the skies will cooperate around us. Are you going to stay in state for that eclipse, Irene?
I'm not sure. I told my mom I was going to try to get her to a total solar eclipse at some point. So we might go a little bit closer to her. She's in Wisconsin, so we might do a different state. So I don't know if I'm going to be here or elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have your site picked out?
Not yet, but
I feel like I needed to have that like a year ago. I'm like getting a little worried. Maybe Ohio. We might do Ohio. My cousin.
Yeah, it's in April, so hopefully the weather cooperates. And then you have a couple of meteor showers. So best thing to do with a meteor shower is usually the meteors are most visible after midnight, getting closer to sunrise. So like 3, 4 in the morning. Just go to a place like the place in Claryville, and just lie on your back in a nice chair, a lounge chair, look at the sky. And
do not use binoculars. Do not use a telescope to see a meteor shower. Just eyeballs up. That's it.
Yep. Another good location where I've gotten some good pictures of the meteors, and also, it's a good viewing location, is right along the Neversink Reservoir. There's a pull-off area there with a kiosk. And, you know, at that time of night, like 4 o'clock in the morning, is really no traffic on the main road. And you can get a good view from there too. So that's another location if you're into the night sky. And you get a nice view of the reservoir too. So coming up, I've got my small telescope talk at the Environmental Center in along the Catskills there at 7 o'clock tomorrow. So I'll bring 5 telescopes for people to try. So it's kind of going to be like if you walk into like a car showroom and you're ready to buy a car, you can go and look at the telescope. There's no tires to kick, but you can twist the focuser and stuff like that. Hopefully the sky will cooperate so you can test it out under the sky. So the idea behind that came from there was a telescope shop, still is a shop that's in near Milford. It's what's the name of it? Montague in New Jersey. It's called High Point Scientific. And on Saturdays, they would open up their showroom. You could actually go to their store and they would have a showroom with telescopes and you could check them out and they'd help you out, like buy a telescope. But they don't do that anymore. They're all mail order. And so these days, to actually look at a telescope set up in a store, I guess you have to go to New York City for it. I don't know of any other places, maybe in New Jersey, but there's no real places to go. And so that's where the idea really came from. Because a lot of times people buy a telescope like off of Amazon and they don't really know what they're getting. So I have some examples of telescopes that, you know, that are fairly new and like, okay, you're going to buy a telescope off of Amazon. So it depends upon how much money you want to spend, I think. And then a big event next month is the Northeast Astronomy Forum at Rockland County Community College, Suffern. It's the largest astronomy show on the East Coast. Lots of vendors, speakers from different universities. A lot of NASA speakers, I think, are on this list. So, like in the past, I saw Neil deGrasse Tyson there. Actually, I saw him twice there. So a lot of speakers on different topics, lots of vendors. So another place, if you wanted to look at telescopes or whatever, they're set up all over the floor of the field house. And you just wander around and, you know, have cash on hand.
Yeah, I always recommend people to go and look at like star parties or events like this where you can go and look through other telescopes. Like if you're in the city, like there's astronomy groups there that have lots of public observing. You can go and look at other people's telescopes before you buy them. Definitely. These other images on here are just more for more events. The sky evening map, again, we'll send the link for that. You can look at the one in April. It'll have, you know, maybe some other events than we've listed here. And I also have a website where I make more of these snarky images. So you can check that out for the Mercury elongation and Venus-Uranus conjunction. There's a little bit up there. So maybe
But nothing as great as Leo the Lion.
I was so proud of that lion. I'm glad I got to share.